Local Edition. My name is Brad Pomerantz, and we are joined today by Mike Spence. Mike is a member of the West Covina City Council, also a candidate for the California State Assembly, and his day job is as Chief of Staff to a member of the Board of Supervisors in San Bernardino. And I tell you that because he was intricately involved in the aftermath of the tragedy at the Inland Regional Center in San Bernardino. In so many ways, you are touched by this. You work for the county. Part of the district in which you are running now is in San Bernardino County. So my first question for you is, here we are a few weeks out. How are you feeling? How are you personally feeling?
Well, it was all kind of surreal when it all happened, and fortunately, law enforcement, both the sheriffs and the San Bernardino City Police, actually did a great job. Normally, there's all kinds. You can't plan for this kind of emergency. You just can't, and they did a great job. And so, fortunately, that went pretty smoothly.
Well, why do you think they did such a good job? And that statement is uniform.
Yeah.
I have heard no criticism.
Exactly, yeah.
I have only heard plaudits and praise. And I think, to me, the most important plaudits came from those that survived and talked about the way these men and women dealt with them with such gentle care.
Yeah, absolutely. And, obviously there's training that's involved. But still, we see that all the time. No one goes and gets the emergency manual down after they did the drill or anything like that. And so, some individuals stepped up and they did a great job, and they were able to deal with that situation very handily.
Talk to me about the day. I interviewed Mr. Hagman, for whom you serve as Chief of Staff, Board of Supervisors in San Bernardino. It was a really emotional day for him. He had been at a meeting with many elected officials with a transportation agency just down the street. You were not with him at that time.
No, right.
Where were you?
Oh, I was in San Bernardino, but I wasn't in the office.
You were not at the county office?
I'm not at the county office. Yeah.
And so how did you come to learn what had happened?
Heard it on the news.
You did.
And then I started getting texts from staff because they shut down the county building. And they locked the supervisor in the office, and that's something I need to know.
Of course.
And then we were trying to figure out what was going on, and then what the county needed to do, because the supervisors needed to make some decisions. They had a meeting that night.
Right.
They were being briefed by the sheriffs at different points, and so there were a lot of things that were going on.
And what's so incredibly chilling is that the perpetrator, the male perpetrator, was an employee of the county.
Right.
And I learned that the supervisor's offices are on the 5th floor of the county building. This individual's office on the 2nd floor.
On the 2nd floor, right. And that was one of the crazy things, because they shut down the building because they didn't want anyone outside, and then they realized he had access to that building, so they had to get people out so they could do a sweep of the building.
Make sure he wasn't in there.
Well, not only that, bombs, and obviously they had all these pipe bombs, but they just had to do a sweep of the building and that kind of stuff.
Did you recognize him? You work in the same building. I know a lot of people work there, but presumably he was in and out, just like you were in and out.
He could have been. I remember having any interaction with him, but obviously he's had an impact on the county and the nation.
Yeah, and tell me about that impact that he's had on your community.
Well, if you, we had a while back, we recognized the individuals who had died, and it was really rough because they were all from one department. They were having a Christmas party. Weren't doing anything wrong. They'd been nice to everybody, and these terrorists, were able to do this. And so
let's talk about the word you just used, terrorists. It's now not in dispute that these two individuals acted with terrorist motives.
Absolutely, they did.
They were driven by radical jihadism, radical Islamist views. In San Bernardino.
Right, and if we would have just looked at the Facebook page, we might not have let the woman into the country.
But yet what's ironic, and we talk about Facebook, is apparently she had certain settings that made it very difficult for us to look at her Facebook page.
Well, I'm not sure we actually did. And
but that brings up the question. Let's kind of delve into this. So many folks have so many conflicting views on this, and it's not a right view or a left view. Some folks feel as if we should be delving deeply into social media. Other folks feel that would be a breach of privacy, and you hear that from the right and the left. So what's your sense of how we handle social media?
Well, we're talking about social media of people that want to come into the United States. And we do background checks. When my grandparents came here from
Right.
Germany, they had background checks to see if he was a member of the Nazi Party. He wasn't.
Right.
But they had to do background checks before they could get in, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be doing background checks on people that come from nations where we know terrorist training has gone on.
But the challenge, for example, this woman from Pakistan and from Saudi Arabia, those two countries aren't at the top of our list. We're looking at Iraq, we're looking at Syria.
Pakistan should be at the top of our list.
But as we speak, it's not. We've
should
heard
be.
proposals from some presidential candidates to exclude all folks of the Islamic faith, but then there are proposals that are less draconian, one could argue, and only focused on countries where ISIS is involved. Well, if that was the case, we wouldn't have swept her because ISIS is not involved in Pakistan or in Saudi Arabia.
Well, actually, they are. They have done terrorist attacks in those countries. But I do think that.
But they're not part of under that definition.
Well, I think both those countries have a long enough history of having people that have been involved in terrorism that they should be checked.
As a member of the state legislature, should you become one, what can you do on this issue? Here we are, we're California, we're practically a nation, if you really think about it. And yet there's only so much we can do, or is there?
Well, I think there are things that we can do. We can enforce our immigration laws, for example, which we don't do in California at all. And so there are individuals that aren't supposed to be here that we can deal with. But there's different things that we can do as far as beefing up security and things like that. I mean, obviously, every contingency can't be taken care of.
Right, and I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about guns, because this brought up this issue of gun access. What we know is that the guns were legally bought, that were used in this incident, but we also know that some of them may have been bought.
They were illegally modified. Every weapon they had was illegal, and obviously, even if there was the strictest gun control in the world, like they have in D.C. and other murder capitals of the United States, these people were building pipe bombs. These terrorists did not care what the law said.
Right.
They wanted to do evil, and they wanted to kill Americans because we stand for liberty, and they can't stand that, and that's what they wanted to do.
So what do we do from here? Because it's undeniable that the question of the Second Amendment has been brought up, and there are folks that feel as if the best approach would be to ease gun restrictions so that anyone could have a gun to prevent something like what happened. There are folks that believe we should tighten gun restrictions so that there wouldn't be access.
Well, obviously, there's access whether or not there's laws saying there's access. I mean, that's the whole problem. That's the problem with criminals. That's the problem with terrorists.
So
they don't care. So obviously, we have to let law-abiding people protect themselves if they want to.
But what does that mean to you? Does that
means
mean
that
allow assault weapon purchases, guns with high magazine?
Well, that means in California. There's limits on what people can do, and in fact, you can't carry openly anymore in California because that was banned. And in most places, you can't even get a concealed weapon permit.
Right.
So there is no way in California for someone to legally carry a gun around, and that needs to change.
As you are campaigning for the state assembly, in parts of San Bernardino County, for example, what are people saying to you about terrorism? Is it top of mind?
Well, I think right now it is, and I think people are frustrated that the federal government doesn't seem to have it at the top of their mind. It took them several days to figure out this was terrorism.
Right.
And I think everybody else figured it out pretty quickly. They worked there, motivated by, their terrorist ideas and by the radical jihadists. And so, it was I think people are frustrated the federal government's not trying to do more about it. Instead we call them the JV team. Instead we don't have a strategy to deal with them. And at the same time, Americans are being killed here in the United States.
His name is Mike Spence. He is a member of the West Covina City Council. He is also a candidate for the California State Assembly. That election will be held in June 2016. My name is Brad Pomerantz. You're watching Charter Local Edition.